Hello everyone, I'm Rebecca Mezoff. Today I'd like to talk just a little bit about how to warp a few of the looms that Schacht Spindle Company makes that have pegs at the top and the bottom. There are looms like the Easel Weaver, the Lilli Loom, and also the Schacht School Loom uses the exact same pegs, so you can warp them all with the same techniques. Every tapestry loom that has pegs or slots is just a little different, but the same concept applies. When you warp a Schacht peg loom like this Lilli Loom, with one warp in each of those slots between the pegs, you'll get a set of around 5.5 warps per inch or ends per inch. Most of the time when I weave, I want a set that's just a little bit closer than that, a little bit finer. 8 ends per inch up to perhaps 12 ends per inch are normal sets for me to weave and teach at. So I want to show you today, using this Lilli Loom, how to put on a warp at different sets. You can get close to just about any set you want by varying the pattern of your warping. Let's do it. Let's look at a few different patterns that you can create with these pegged looms from Schacht. This is the Easel Weaver loom, which I'm just going to show you 3 different warping patterns so you can get a feeling for what we're going to be doing here. Here on this edge one, I have warped the loom just as it comes. So there's one warp in each of the slots between the pegs, and that gives us 5.5 warps per inch approximately. That's a little bit of a wide set for me. I like a little bit narrower set. I'm looking for something usually between 8 and 12 ends per inch. So this example in the middle, I've warped it at 8 ends per inch. And I've done that with a pattern of warping 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And then I've done some twining to space the warps. So I'm going to show you how to do all of that in this video. Then the last pattern here, I warped with 2 warps in each of the slots between the pegs. And that gave me approximately 11 ends per inch. I'm going to be demonstrating today on the Lilli Loom at this center set of 8 ends per inch. I'll show you how to get that on the Schacht peg looms. Let's warp this Lilli Loom at about 8 ends per inch. To do that, we're going to use a pattern of 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1 in terms of how we put the warp on. This is the pattern that you need on this Schacht loom, the Lilli Loom, and the Easel Weaver loom, and also their school loom uses this very same pegs. Different looms will need different patterns to get you the ends per inch that you want. To start with, I just use a plain old slip knot. You're just going to make a loop and then bring the working end through. That little knot will slide, and you can start it on the peg you want to start on. I'm going to do a 3-inch warp. So starting at the top with that slip knot, bring it down to the bottom and count the number of pegs that you're skipping, top and bottom, so you get your warp on straight. As I'm warping this, I am putting a little tension on this cotton seine twine. This is 12/6 cotton seine twine. It's a fantastic tapestry warp, and on a loom like this without tensioning, it's really nice because you can stretch it just a little bit as you put it on, which gives you a little bit tighter warp. I'm going to double the edge warp, and I'm going to use that one doubled, which means that I'm counting this as 1 warp, and then the next one I'm going to put 2. So my pattern really is 1, 2, and the next one here is just 1 warp. And then I wrap around. I'm going to put 2. So here's 2. This one will be 1. This next one will have 2 warps in that slot. So I come around. I just go back to that slot and put a second one in there. There are other looms that don't have the pegs as nicely spaced as this loom does, and so we don't have to do any warping in any weird way to get it spaced well. This loom just works great if you just put the warp into the slot that you want it to go into next. All right, so now I have 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. So then we'll go over to the next one, and that one will be doubled. So when I get to the top, I'm coming back around and heading down again. Now let's just check. 2, 1, 2, 1. So I don't want this next one to be doubled. So at the bottom here, I will skip over one of the slots to the next one so that my pattern is maintained. Okay, and then back up to the top. Now this one was 1. This next one we're going to double. So we'll come around, down, and then go backwards again, and back up to the top. Again, you'll notice I check this a lot. The edge, there are 2 warps here, but I'm counting it as 1. 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. So we're going to not double that next one. So at the top I had to skip to go down here. As long as you just look at your pattern and make that happen, however you need to wrap around at the top, it will work just fine. So this one I had to go back, 2, 1, 2, 1 to get there. And then back up to the top. This one I'm putting in right now, I'm going to want doubled. So I come back down, wrap around, and go back up here. That's my warp making that noise. All right, and back down again. I'm putting on a 3-inch warp, so I'm going to need at 8 ends per inch about 18 warps. Sometimes I'll put on an extra 1 or 2 because if you want a piece that's 3 inches wide, sometimes it will shrink in just a little bit, and it's nice to have 1 or 2 extra warps depending on your set. 2, 1. This one I need doubled, so back to the top. And then I just come back 1 peg so that this one here is doubled. Then I don't need this next one doubled, so I skip over here at the bottom. I'm skipping 2 and back up to the top. I don't want this one doubled, so I'm going to go to the right and back down. And so I have 2, 1. I do need this one doubled, so I come back and go up. And then I think this is the end. 1, let's see how many warps we have here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. I lied. I want 8 times 3 is 24. So let's go with this 25. So then if I do that, I will have this edge one doubled again, but I'm going to weave it just as a single warp. I just like the doubled edges. I use a fairly thin warp, and the doubled edges give me a firmer selvage. So that's just a habit I do. You don't have to double that edge warp, but it does mean that here at the end, I'm going to end up with my warp tied off at the bottom. On this loom, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to tie a knot down here versus at the top, and it won't be a problem. But I will usually do a little thing here where I just wind it around some pegs to keep it secure. In this case, because I have extra pegs at the edge, I'm going to use the edge pegs to do that. Just because I don't necessarily want that winding to push this warp down a little bit. It's kind of a picky thing. It doesn't matter that much. I like to secure my final warp on a peg loom by cutting a long piece and actually wrapping it all the way around the loom. You can secure it however you want. If you want to tie a half hitch knot around a peg, that's totally fine. You just want to try to keep it tight so that the last warp doesn't get floppy. And then I will probably go like this and use a little needle. Oops. Use a needle here to tie that knot. Use a variety of needle sizes on my little needle block here just to make sure that there's one available. There's a lot of different ways you can secure this at the end. It's not important how you do it. It's just important that it is. So I will trap it with my fingers and just tie it tightly there. Sometimes it's a little hard to get the warp around. Okay, there we go. So that will be nice and tight, and I won't have to worry about that. And our warp is done. The next thing we need to do is even these out. So this is the little trick that is maybe the point of this video more than anything else, is that I'm going to use twining at the bottom and at the top to get these doubled warps to space out so it looks like we have a warp that's 8 EPI. Right now it looks like we have a warp that's 5.5 EPI and every other warp is fatter or doubled. But we want to get those all spread out so at the beginning of our tapestry we have a beautiful even warp to start with. To do that, I like to use a thicker warp. It doesn't have to be warp to do this twining piece. You could use, if you have some kitchen twine, some kind of cotton that's thicker, if you have some kind of a firm weft that you use for your tapestry, you could use a fatter bundle. The warp that I'm using here is quite thin, and I could use that probably doubled to do the exact same thing here. But I'm going to demonstrate so it's easier to see with a piece of this 12-15 cotton seine twine. If you have some fatter twine like this, it's really nice for this twining. The length you'll need to do the twining is about 2.5 times the width of your warp, plus a little bit. I usually go about 3, and I'm a little bit generous because I want to have enough to tie a good knot. Okay, so take your piece of warp or whatever you're using for your twining. It's actually not important what it is as long as it's somewhat firm and you're just going to push it down to the bottom of the piece. It won't be part of your tapestry. Fold it in half and then put it around the first warp. And then I sort of trap it here with my finger. And then I take the one in front and put it behind the next warp. Twining is a figure 8 pattern between the warps. So I drop this one, pick this one that's in front, go above and behind that next warp. And that's creating a little cross there. So now this one, go over that warp that's laying here, this last piece, and pull it behind. So you can already see how that's helping space out these warps. You want to get the twining so it looks pretty even. Sometimes you have to tug one of the ends a little bit to even it out. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's nice if it's not too uneven. So I'm just going to keep doing that all the way across. Here's a close-up of doing the twining. The end that is in front, so this is the last warp that this one went under. This one's in front. That one is going to go under the next warp. They just take turns. You do want to make sure if there's a doubled warp that you're not twisting it from the twining at the other end. So make sure you keep the warps in the same order. Once you get all the way to the end, I just tie a little square knot with this. So I just do left over right, right over left, and leave those little tails. You can actually cut them short. If you don't want these tails in your way, there's no reason you can't just clip them off. And then what we're going to do with this is push this twining all the way to the bottom of the loom. And that will just be how we have spaced out our warps before we start weaving. Now to get these spaced out more evenly I'm going to turn the loom around and do the very same thing at the other end. And we'll push that one all the way here, and you'll see when I finish that it makes the warp nice and evenly spaced. So here you can see this is the top of the loom. I have done the whole way across, and I'm just going to again push that to the very top, and then we can see that our warp spacing is looking pretty good. It is not entirely perfect, but once we put in our header and start weaving, that will even out even more. If you really want this warp spacing to be absolutely perfect at the beginning, you'll have to play with what size twine you're using for the twining. In this case, I needed one that was a little bit thicker than the 12-15 warp I used, and that would help get this even more evenly spaced. So from here, you're ready to put in your header and start weaving your tapestry. If you'd like to learn more about tapestry weaving, take a look at my online classes. You'll find them at tapestryweaving.com. Your Schacht tapestry looms are really wonderful tools, and any of them will work in any of my online classes. If you'd like a little discount code, use SchachtFun22 for 10% off any of my classes today. Hope I see you online. And I certainly hope that this particular video has helped you figure out how to warp your pegged looms at any set you want. Go dig out that Lilli loom and have fun weaving. Catch you later.